Jesu akaenderera mberi achinyengetera. Ndakaratidza zita renyu kunavo vamakandipa panyika. Vakanga vari venyu, mukavapa kwandiri, uye vakateerera shoko renyu. Zvino vanoziva kuti zvinhu zvose zvamakandipa zvinobva kwamuri, nokuti ndakavapa mashoko amakandipa, uye vakaagamuchira. Vakaziva zvechokwadi kuti ndakabva kwamuri, uye vakatenda kuti makandituma. Ndinovanyengeterera, handisi kunyengeterera nyika, asi avo vamakandipa, nokuti ndevenyu. Jesus continued in prayer. I have revealed your name to the people you gave me from the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything you have given me is from you, because I have given them the words you gave me. They have received them and have known for certain that I came from you. They have believed that you sent me. I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you gave me, because they are yours. You may have been thrown off when I started reading in Shona. Don't worry, you're not the first and you're not the last. Many bishops who were gathered at the Lambeth Conference were also thrown off, because when the Archbishop stood up, he started speaking in French. Many times people think that it is only those who cannot speak in English who needed to have their earphones for translations. So many of those who can speak English didn't have their headphones because they thought we don't need them. But not every one of them understood French. So I read the passage that we have been reflecting on. I think that Bishop Rose sort of mentioned in her address, as well as in our prayers, Jesus' prayer, that we might all be one. And I read that in my mother tongue, Shona, which is a local language from Zimbabwe. I think by God's grace, I don't have to dwell so much on the first part of my presentation, because Bishop Rose has done that. We didn't communicate, so I am just glad that she has introduced some of what I was going to say already. So that means we have a little bit of some time to just have conversations around our tables. But perhaps maybe this is your first time hearing what Lambeth Conference, or maybe hearing about Lambeth Conference. And you may be asking yourself, what is Lambeth Conference? A simple definition that was used this year to define Lambeth Conference is an international meeting of Anglican bishops and their spouses to discuss church and world affairs and the global mission of the Anglican Communion for the decade ahead. An international meeting of Anglican bishops and their spouses to discuss church and the world affairs and the global mission of the Anglican Communion for the decade ahead. Questions have been raised in the past, and I think they were addressed in this Lambeth Conference as to what power does the Lambeth Conference have when we look at the instruments in the Anglican Church? Can they decide for all the churches what should and what should not be done? Well, I'm not going to give you an answer, but I can say when you see Archdeacon Will, ask him, because he gave us a very good answer as to what exactly is the Lambeth Conference and defining what the role of the Lambeth Conference is in the context of the life of the Anglican Church. But perhaps you're also maybe asking, what is the Anglican Communion? Anglican Communion is a network of independent and interdependent churches in communion or reciprocal relationship with the See of Canterbury. a total of 42 provinces and 5 extra provincial areas based in 165 countries. Not the word or the words with the C of Canterbury, because I'm going to maybe come back to those words a little bit later. So Lambeth Conference 2022, which I had the grace and the privilege to be part of the planning process, which ended up taking 5 years thanks to COVID, but it happened and we thank God for it. The attendance was 635 bishops. Amongst them, 97 were female, of which one of them was our own Bishop Rose. 460 spouses attended and 45 ecumenical guests. But whilst we celebrate the attendance of those who were there, we also recognize that there are some provinces who did not come. The church in Nigeria, Uganda, and Burundi. Is it Burundi? Rwanda, yes. Uganda, Rwanda, and Nigeria, they decided not to come. Other provinces, the likes of Kenya, they had other bishops present, but not everyone from that part of the province attended. So while we celebrate that 635 attended in person and others joined online, we also lament that there are some brothers and sisters who should have been there who chose not to come. And whilst we also celebrate that we had 97 female bishops, we also need to lament that perhaps that was not reflected at the conference in terms of the space where women were also allowed to worship, to lead in worship. So we celebrate that we had 97 female bishops, but we also lament that we had none of those female bishops celebrating a service. One of them celebrated at the closing celebration. But some of the worship services that happened throughout the conference, not one of them really celebrated on their own. They took part in the service, either by reading or by helping with communion, but none of them celebrated. So we mentioned that whilst we celebrate this is also where we are as a communion. We still have those struggles that we have. And I come from originally, where I was born, a province in the Anglican Communion that does not yet accept female ordination. So we name that whilst we celebrate the milestones that we have, there are still some places where there is still so much going on. But of those that attended, they had a lovely time because they were welcomed and were supported by stewards who were young people from the age of 25 to around 30, who were, not 25, 18 to 30, who were drawn from different parts of the communion. And they didn't need to be ordained, so it was a mixture of those who are ordained, those who know what they are doing, those who are still questioning what God might be calling them to do. But they were young people with energy, young people who helped the bishops to find their way. I didn't know that Kent University is that big and everyone would get lost, but thanks to the stewards who were there who also helped. But many thanks also to the volunteers who were drawn from this Canterbury Diocese. I should mention that we couldn't have been able to do what we did, what we achieved, if it wasn't for the men and women from this diocese who supported and who helped. So for that, as part of the design group, may I just take this opportunity to thank all those who supported, either by being stewards or by being volunteers, but also to thank each and every one of you who prayed for this conference. I'm sure we all were anxious about what was going to happen. And what was achieved at the end of that conference could have only been by God's grace. Because at the crucial moment, God showed up. He did. And for that, it is because we had people in our local churches who continued to pray for us and who supported us in prayer. And so thank you very much. So the themes, as Bishop Rose has already highlighted, was God's church for God's world, walking, listening, and witnessing together. The conference, because of COVID, just happened that it naturally happened that it became a conference in 3 phases. So the first phase of the conference happened online when the bishops had their bishops' conversations, when they engaged in the study of 1 Peter during the lockdown and on Zoom. And then they came together in person. So they listened to each other in those conversations, then came together in person and continued the conversations, listening together, but also working together. And the phase 3 of the conference, which now happens after the conference, is also witnessing together. So as God's church for God's world, the idea is we do not just look internal, but we look outside. And some of the things that were discussed at the conference was themes around science and technology, mission and evangelism, discipleship, environment and sustainable development, reconciliation, Christian unity, and life within the Anglican Communion. And so as we think of life within the Anglican Communion, I just want us here to hear a little bit. As this video plays, it's one of the summaries for one of the days. Let's listen what stands out for us, and then we have instructions afterwards.
Today at the Lambeth Conference, we think about what it means to be Anglican. What does it mean to be part of this church? And in true Anglican fashion, we start the day by worshipping together, using liturgy that we hold in common, followed by Bible study on 1 Peter 2, looking at holiness together, and then conversation, seminars, and more time to explore together.
Talking about who we are. We're spending time with each other, understanding each other, growing into understanding with each other, and our identity as Anglicans, our identity as Anglican Christians, our identity in Christ as brothers and sisters together is absolutely central to who we are, what we're doing, and I believe incredibly important.
As a Christian from Jerusalem, I am a proud Anglican. I am blessed to have the opportunity and privilege to serve not only my people within my diocese, but also the wider Anglican communion. The gift of pilgrimage and sharing our faith journey as we walk together in the footsteps of Jesus is our contribution to the unity and well-being of the Anglican communion.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It is such a privilege, such a pleasure to join you today for this seminar about transforming conflict and division. We're asking what the role of the church is in that. This time today is about making reconciliation a reality and thinking what is the particular role of the bishop and their spouse in that.
The Spouses Conference is fantastic. We've got people from all over the world speaking many different languages, walking alongside each other, sharing our stories, being with each other in silence as well as talking alongside each other.
We have been a church that is both local and global, which is exactly what being an Anglican is about in the 21st century. We're a church with many different provinces, each of which expresses what it means to be Anglican in their own context, in their own special way, and yet provinces that choose to walk together despite our many differences. Difference, in the words of Archbishop Maimbo this morning, is something we need to attend to. He reminded us to mind the gap, that there is a gap between us, a gap that makes us different, and we need to acknowledge it. We need to listen to one another, notice the difference, and in our difference, be enriched, learn to walk together closer to the God who cares for his church and cares for the world.
For many of the bishops who were there, including myself, Canterbury is seen as the mother diocese of the Anglican Communion, the See of Canterbury, those in communion with the See of Canterbury. And that means a lot to so many of the people out there. And in just a minute, I'm just going to invite you. Question number one, maybe just think about it for yourself. Does the Anglican mean anything to you? From what you have heard, was there something that you say, yes, I belong to this? But probably just in your small spaces, for a minute, just share any blessing or burden of being the mother diocese of the Anglican Communion. Do you see any blessing from that, or it's just a burden? Good. We can continue with our conversations. This is just brain teasers to tease the conversations. We can continue with those or answering those questions over coffee and over lunch. But as we continue, we heard something around mind the gap. And we have already identified some of the gaps that are still there in the Anglican Communion. But there is also a gap that is not just there in the Anglican Communion, a gap that is also there even in our life as a diocese. The gap between the adults and the youth or the young people, whatever language you may want to use. How was this reflected in the Lambeth Conference? I remember in one of the meetings when we were saying we need to hear voices of young people and saying, what do young people want to say in a bishop's meeting? What do they have to say? It's a bishop's meeting, so why should we even bother? But thank God, because of God's grace, I think people managed to reach a milestone that we celebrate. We still have to build on it. But some of the young people's voices were heard in this conference. They contributed in different ways, vox pops, sending their reflections, but also significantly in the cause, the outcome of the conference. Every drafting team had to have a young person in that group. And not just there for the sake of having one young person, but to really listen to their voice and to be challenged. That is also expected to continue into the phase 3 of the conference, that whatever team is set up, it will also have a young person in that group. And as we think of the voices of the young people, one young person also had an opportunity of addressing the bishops. And I'm just going to show you again a short video of what she said. In as much as she was talking in particular about issues to do with environment, I think the questions that she raised are prevalent in all aspects of our ministerial life as well.
I believe in our human capacity to care deeply and to act collectively. I believe in our ability to do what is right if we let ourselves feel it in our hearts. And I believe that we can absolutely find our way out of the planetary crisis we face. But to do so, we will need to change our way of thinking and start telling new stories about what is important and what is possible. And this is where I think the faith community has a vital role to play.
It is not just, I think, on the issues to do with environment, but on issues to do even with young people and their life in the church. So one of the Lambeth calls, which is an invitation to the outside world, reads like this. We, referring to the bishops at Lambeth after their discussions and deliberations on the subject and the theme of discipleship, call on our churches to work intentionally and creatively with young people so that they can enable this learning. This learning is referring to the 5 marks of mission, which is to tell, to teach, tend, transform, and treasure. And transformation to take place for themselves and for the whole church. So the bishops at Lambeth Conference are calling on their church, which we are a part, are calling on Canterbury Diocese to work intentionally and creatively with young people so that they can enable this learning of the 5 marks of mission and transformation to take place for themselves and for the whole church. This is not just an aspiration of the bishops at Lambeth, because I think for us as well as a diocese, we also had that as part of our strategy. And on the last update that I found on our diocesan strategy, I found this. To encourage and equip young leaders, our new youth council, launched late in 2021, exists to hear and share the voice of young people across the diocese, to release them in leadership positions and develop their leadership skills. So this is what we as a diocese want to do. Maybe in answering the call from the bishops at Lambeth, but also for us as a diocese, we have already identified the need to do this. But if we look in the room, there is no young person in the room, truth be told. I may be young, but I don't think I am young any longer. But so my question for you, the same questions that I raised for those that I worked with in the design group, the questions that I raised for the bishops that I had an opportunity of speaking to, is, are we hearing the voices of young people? So are we, as the Synod in Canterbury Diocese, hearing the voices of young people in this diocese? What examples can we give that we can say we have had their voices? Not even speaking of Synod, in our own churches, are we hearing the voices of young people? If we identify the Youth Council as a milestone towards us addressing our strategy of increasing the numbers of young people in 2030, how are we building on the work of the Youth Council so far? Are we asking questions when we meet in our PCCs, when we meet in our deaneries on what we are doing? Do they even know what the Youth Council is, or it's something that we just see from afar and it doesn't mean anything in our local churches? As we mind the gaps, we also need to attend to those gaps and take steps that we can to reduce the gaps that are there. I think the bishops at Lambeth managed to do that. But the task is now on us, on what are we going to do. So I pose these questions for your deliberations and conversations as you go throughout the day. But to end, may I just share with you a story. In one of the seminars, when we were thinking of missional formation with young people, we had a young lady from Sri Lanka sharing her story. She said, I was invited to be in the Diocesan Council, but in that meeting, whenever it was time to make decisions, the bishop would send her out to go and make tea. It is sad because it meant she was out of the room, but her voice was, she was in the room, but when it mattered, her voice was not heard. We have young people in our churches. We send them out when we have to make decisions. Are we really sitting down and listening to them?